Welcome to the Permian period, an ancient time full of life, but also death. The Permian was home to the largest mass extinction event in Earth's history, even bigger than what wiped out the dinosaurs. Nearly all life was brought to an end. But how did this extinction event come about in the first place? And what kind of life did end up surviving? This is What If, and here's what would happen if you lived in the Permian period. The Permian period lasted almost 50 million years, from 299 to 252 million years ago. You can divide it into three parts: early, middle, and late. And we're going to walk you through all three of them. Let's start, obviously, in the early Permian. This period saw the birth of some of the earliest four-legged creatures. They're all extinct now, but they were the forefathers to dinosaurs and later mammals. They were massive predators that you definitely want to stay away from. On land, the apex predators were the synapsid. This species ruled the land before dinosaurs took their place. They're often referred to as mammal-like reptiles, and they look like a mix between a dog and a lizard. They also had incredibly thick skin, which retained a lot of moisture. This allowed them to thrive in the increasingly dry environment. The most famous synapsid, and one you would definitely not want to encounter, is the Dimetrodon. Over 3.5 meters long, this carnivorous predator had a large sail on its back. Since it was cold-blooded, it needed something to regulate its temperature. Maybe this sail-like appendage did the job. It helped the Dimetrodon heat up and cool down depending on the temperature. These beasts were also equipped with an incredibly scary mouthful of teeth that were all different sizes. Another animal you'll have to worry about? Gorgonopsians. These were carnivores with saber-toothed fangs. They remind me a lot of Siberian tigers. Some scientists have described them as the T-Rex of their time. They were frightening predators that could destroy anything in their path. And their favorite food? Dicynodonts. That name literally means two dog teeth. Thankfully, if you encountered one, you wouldn't need to be afraid because they might become your lunch. Yeah, these synapsids were herbivores, and they came in all different sizes. They could be small, like a pet dog, or as big as a cow. Dicynodonts looked like the love child of mammals, reptiles, and birds. They had the skull of a turtle, the beak of a bird, and even tusks to dig food out of the ground. Dicynodonts in the Permian era were cold-blooded, but during the Triassic period that followed, varieties evolved to become more like mammals, with features that helped keep them warm. Now, amazingly, these creatures survived the catastrophe that we'll get to later on, which is a good thing because otherwise humans wouldn't have evolved. We'll get back to what creatures you'd come across in the Permian in a bit, but for now, let's talk about where they lived. Okay, during this period, if you looked down on Earth from high up in space, you'd see that the land was made up of just one supercontinent. It was called Pangaea. It was formed by the collision of two large continents, Gondwana and Euramerica. The formation of this single large landmass had a massive impact on the climate. But before we get to that, let's look at how today's continents mapped into this supercontinent. Pangaea looked a bit like a giant crescent. The top curve of the crescent would later break apart to form Europe and Asia. The main body of the crescent contained North America, South America, and Africa. And the bottom, well, it would later separate to form India, Antarctica, and Australia. The crescent curved to contain what was called the Tethys Ocean. And the rest of Earth, well, it was all one giant body of water called the Panthalassic Ocean. Okay, so far so good. Yeah, you don't have the choice of 7 continents to live on, but you could set up camp anywhere on Pangaea. Maybe you'd enjoy a spot on the beach. But here's the important question. Are you gonna freeze to death? Or would you just bake? Well, this would depend on when you get there and where you land. At the beginning of the Permian, Earth was actually in an ice age. Hope you packed a parka. If you set foot on the southern region of Pangaea, you'd find tons of glaciers, or literally gigatons of glaciers. These could be found in what is now southern India, Australia, and Antarctica. Now, due to this giant landmass, the weather will be vastly different from what you're used to today. In our current world, the oceans do an amazing job at absorbing heat. They also warm up and cool down slowly, affecting the temperatures on land. But on this supercontinent, the interior land was far from water, so temperatures in this area are much more extreme. In the middle Permian, you'd enjoy a climate that's warmer, milder, and moist. The glaciers have now receded. Inland, Pangaea is arid, and according to the Pangaean mega monsoon theory, there were extreme seasonal fluctuations. You'd be hit with wet and dry periods throughout the year. With further increases in temperature, the late Permian would be very dry, with some alternating warm and cool periods. Now, what about the atmosphere? Was there enough oxygen for you to survive? Well, at the beginning of the Permian, oxygen concentration was actually pretty high, 30%. This is because of what had happened on Earth during the previous Carboniferous period. Forests had covered the Earth, creating an oxygen-rich atmosphere. Now, you might enjoy this extra boost of oxygen. You'd feel more energized and lively. Living in the mountains would be much more comfortable because the thinner air would now be offset by the higher oxygen concentration. But as good as oxygen is, you can't breathe it for too long at this concentration. Over time, you'd overdose and get oxygen toxicity. You could have difficulty breathing, and in severe cases, you might have a seizure and die. But high oxygen levels didn't last the whole time. There was a big drop toward the end. But before we get to that, you're probably wondering, what is there around here to eat? Well, as temperatures rose during the Permian, plant life began to take off. But unfortunately, there wouldn't be many options for you on the menu. In the early Permian, there were polar tundra regions as well as tropical swamp forests. Now, as the climate became more dry, the swamp forests dried out and water-loving plants shrank to become shrubs. So, unless you had the jaws and stomach of a cow or 4 stomachs of a cow, eating these dry shrubs wouldn't have been too much fun to chomp on. And unfortunately, these shrubs were all shrub, no berry. There were no fruits at this time. They didn't really evolve till the Jurassic, so you'd probably be at risk of getting scurvy. But there was plenty of one thing: ferns. Ferns were the dominant plant life. Maybe you could eat some tender fern leaves and make some tea out of tree bark. It's no whopper value meal, but it'll do, I guess. Some of these plants would have been dangerous too. You wouldn't be accustomed to them, and they might cause some sort of deadly allergic reaction. But nasty plants weren't your only option for food. Why don't you try a nasty insect instead? The increased growth of plant life during this time provided a haven for insects. Bugs with sucking mouth parts made their debut during the Permian. You'd also see massive dragonflies roaming about. Maybe try to catch one of those. I wonder if they taste like chicken. You'd also notice that these insects are massive. In the early Permian, the large insects from the previous Carboniferous era were still around. By the middle Permian, these giant insects had disappeared. What was left were smaller insects that are still around today in some form. But forget these gross plants and insects. Where are the animals we could eat? Well, you wouldn't want to target the scary Dimetrodon or the Gorgonopsian that we met earlier. Some grilled herbivorous Dicynodont would be nice. It's no Popeye's Spicy Chicken Deluxe, but it just might hit the spot. Now, on the smaller side of creatures, there were the Varanopids. These were small lizard-like creatures that mainly dined on insects. Another super important group during the Permian was the Sauropsids. These were basically reptiles. During the Permian period, when synapsids dominated, the Sauropsids remained small and lizard-like, but they'd make a fiery comeback later on. I don't know about you, but these animals are either looking scary or unappetizing. And I'm not really in the mood to eat a cross between a lizard and a dog. Can you catch some fish? Maybe a fillet of fish? Permian seas were full of bony fish, which had two features: fan-shaped fins and thick scales. There were also creatures with coiled spiral shells called ammonoids that lived in the water. Again, it's no ultimate endless shrimp, but a seafood diet might be your best bet. Now, if you go for a dip, watch out. You'll want to steer clear of the scary Gaiasia geniae, a salamander-like creature with deadly fangs and a 2-foot-long skull. This creature was way bigger than you. It was 2.5 meters long. Scientists describe its head as being like a toilet seat, which opened up to suck in its prey. The good news? It was sluggish, so if you're a fast swimmer, maybe you can escape it. But not everything thrived during this time. As you reach the late Permian, you'll notice things changing. Creatures all around the planet are going extinct in what's known as the Great Dying. This was Earth's biggest mass extinction event. 90% of marine life and 70% of all animal and plant life died out. Now, scientists still aren't completely sure what caused this mass extinction, but there are several theories. One of the leading theories is that a series of natural disasters is what got the whole thing going. Volcanoes. Toward the end of the Permian period, there were massive volcanic eruptions in what's now Siberia. And not just for a few years or decades, for about 600,000 years. Huge flows of lava flooded the region, but it wasn't the lava that caused the extinction. It was the volcanic gases that were being spewed into the air. This caused an increased concentration of sulfur dioxide in Earth's atmosphere. What happened next? Acid rain. Volcanic ash was also thrown up in the sky, blocking the sun, making it dark out, also causing the temperature to fall. As a result, plants found it harder to photosynthesize and the food chain was disrupted. The extinction of plant life, then herbivores, and then carnivores followed. It was like a set of dominoes falling. But it wasn't just the food chain. It was literally becoming harder to breathe because the impact to plants also had major effects on the atmosphere. With the disruption to photosynthesis, carbon dioxide increased while oxygen levels plummeted to 16%. Animals that had evolved in a more oxygen-rich atmosphere weren't ready for this drop in oxygen and then died off. If you were there, it would be like trying to breathe at the top of a giant mountain today. Now, as this was happening, animals living at higher altitudes suddenly found the oxygen too thin for their requirements, so they probably moved to lower altitudes and had to compete with other species. Some scientists believe that this is what drove land-based extinctions. Oxygen levels were so low that animals had to remain where the air was most dense, at sea level. Even the slightest climb to a higher altitude would have them gasping for breath. And the rising carbon dioxide also created a greenhouse effect, causing temperatures to rise. This made the oceans warmer as well, which killed a ton of marine life. The rising temperature plus the reduced oxygen equaled a horrible world for all life on Earth, making it nearly impossible to survive. But there's a third theory. Initially, scientists estimated that the Great Dying took place over millions of years, but more recent archaeological evidence indicates that it happened much faster, maybe between 8,000 and 100,000 years. Could something else have happened that caused an abrupt end to these creatures? Yeah, some scientists think there's another culprit, an asteroid. In addition to all these erupting volcanoes, scientists have also found evidence of an asteroid collision. This asteroid may have been 6 to 12 kilometers wide. That's bigger than Mount Everest. So maybe it's a mix of all of them. The the volcanic eruptions, the atmospheric effects, and then wham! A massive asteroid as the final nail in the coffin. You combine all three of these events and you've got yourself the Earth's largest mass extinction. But not all creatures died off. Some of the lucky ones managed to survive. The dicynodonts later evolved into rodent-like creatures. They lived side by side with the dinosaurs. Sure, they weren't the top of the food chain, but it beats going extinct. They even outlasted the dinosaurs, evolving into present-day mammals. Small sharks migrated to the depths of the ocean, avoiding the acidic coastal waters, and they're still around today. The sauropsid reptiles also survived. Small lizards had a better chance of surviving compared to the big synapsids. Being cold-blooded and sluggish were excellent survival traits. In the coming Triassic and Jurassic periods, they evolved into mighty dinosaurs. It was once assumed that most trees went extinct during the Great Dying too, but scientists continue to find plant species that survived that time. Life, whether it's microorganisms, plants, or animals, is resilient and it always finds a way. Now let's see if the dinosaurs can survive their mass extinction event. That sounds like a story for another What If.